Um, Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to today's topic, which is going to be about spam. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Brandy Simpson. I am a professor of history at Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia. And today we are speaking with one of our conveners, Kelly Spring. Welcome, Kelly. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit more informal than what we usually do. Kelly and I are going to have a conversation for a bit about her latest book, Spam, A Global
Yes,
History.
we can both show it.
And
Yes, there
there
it
it
is.
is. We got our copies right here. And allow me to introduce Kelly. Kelly Spring is a food studies entrepreneur. She is a researcher, a writer, and a lecturer. And her work examines the impact of international crises on domestic and global food systems. Kelly's company, The Forkfront, offers services ranging from consulting, researching, and writing about food history to creating curated food history narratives, courses, and menus. Her book, which is out now, Spam, A Global History, published by Reaktion Press this year, charts how food was used by the United States to spread its culture and values in wartime, impacting people's foodways and lifestyles around the globe. In 2017, Kelly founded the IHR Food History Seminar, and
Amazingly.
I believe this is the year that we met, if I am not mistaken, or
Oh,
28, no,
is
28.
it? Okay. In the IHR common room, I believe.
Yes, we
Yes.
sure did. We did. And so I welcome you all to our food study seminar today. And the topic again is spam. And I'm inviting all the people who are joining us today to share your spam memories in the chat. So please do that as we are chatting about Kelly's book today. I'm really excited about this book. I really enjoyed reading this. This was fun and good reading. But I do want to just kind of kick off our discussion with a question. How did you get started? And really, why spam? Why spam?
Yeah, yes, why I often, yeah, people often look at me like spam? Really? Really? Okay. Um, yeah, so spam, this is, I should say, this is like a pandemic project. So I was sort of sitting at home, we had sort of endless hours that there was nothing to do, we couldn't go anywhere. And so at nighttime, I would sort of, because I'm a British historian and a war historian, and I knew that it was in Britain during World War II. But I didn't quite know all the history. So I would sit at home at nighttime during the pandemic and look at the British Library's newspapers online. So you can access it either free or sort of very inexpensively. And I would just search spam and I would spend hours looking through, yes, I looking through sort of British newspapers about spam. And it sort of that was my entertainment. Yes, that's what food historians do. We just research for entertainment, or at least I do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it started. And originally, like a book was nowhere on my horizon. It was just going to be maybe a fun project, maybe an article. And it wasn't until one of my friends sent me the call for book proposals for Reaktion Press and said, "Oh, I know you're working on spam. I think this would really make a really good book." And that's how it became a book. So the
Um,
original research is actually chapter 3 in the book, which is on British food history during World War II. And then it kind of went all around that. So, it sort of pieced it all together, really.
I love it. That's fantastic. I do want to ask you. I mean, honestly, this book it's impressive for its breadth.
Oh, thank you.
You've got English history in there. You've got Korean cuisine, American. We've got Hong Kong, Philippines, Guam. I haven't even mentioned. I think I missed out. I mean, there's so many I missed out. How did you cover that? How did you cover that many places? What was your research process like?
Yes, that's an interesting question. What was my research process? So I think I had the advantage in that I had lived in two of the countries that I covered. So as you mentioned, I talked about, there's a chapter in the book about Korea. And so I
Mhm.
lived in Korea for 3 years. I taught in Korea. And so I saw spam in Korea. And that fascinated me because actually spam is very highly valued in Korea. And it's totally different in the United States where it's much less thought of, it's much sort of lower status. But in Korea, it's valued. People eat it in their like national dishes. People will give it as gifts during national holidays. So they've got sort of a harvest festival known as Chuseok and a sort of New Year's festival called Solal. And they will give like gifts of spam or gift baskets. And for
Mhm.
me, that struck me as so opposite to what we experience in the United States. And so I had that already, long-term knowledge. That was a while ago. And then I also lived in the UK when I did my PhD at the University of Manchester. And so I could see Spam was still on the shelves. It still is. You can still buy it, but it's not so well valued. It's a bit like American in the sense that, it's sort of relegated to the fish and chip shop, or, there's often generational gaps. So people who grew up in the wartime might find it interesting. So I had that kind of idea in my mind. So I had a sort of personal connection. Doing the
Mhm.
PhD also, I could read that there was spam in different aspects about British diaries or British memories. I mean, so it always stuck in my head that, yeah, I want to do something with spam. And so, I kind of, in order to expand my research process, I kind of did a sort of overview of like pegged it out, doing sort of, oh, just general research to see how far reaching it was. And indeed, I couldn't cover everything in the book. There's many more countries. I mean, spam is in something like 48 countries in the world. And so that would have been a much bigger book, and they wouldn't let me write that much, unfortunately. Um, but because I'm a war historian and I knew that World War II was really pivotal to spam, that I wanted to concentrate on that. So many of the chapters relate to that. But I kind of basically pegged it out and then wrote the book proposal, and that gave me the roadmap to then go much more in depth when I actually did the research. So it's kind of like wide view and then the sort of much more in-depth view as I went. But yeah, it's sort of, every research project's a bit different, and you kind of learn as you go and add. And yeah, it was I just enjoyed it immensely. And so I just worked with whatever information that came along to me, really.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Because I was puzzled as I was reading. I was like, how is she getting all these places?
That's kind of, so I haven't been to all, but I've been to several. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump around a little bit in terms of chronology. I'm going to ask you a little bit about on page 54, you talk about the resurgence of the popularity of spam in the UK during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And you mentioned a short supply of meat, possibly. And can you tell us a little bit more about um, how spam continues to kind of shore up situation in the UK, and how did people feel about it? Anything that you might have picked up from that?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, we had this really unique set of circumstances, right? And we experienced this in the United States and indeed other parts of the world. So there was often either people were buying huge amounts of food and other sort of grocery goods, sort of stockpiling them, so hoarding them in sense, or stockpile them. In another sense, there was sort of rampant spread of disease in different manufacturing sectors. And so there was a closing down or limiting of people who could sort of process these things. And so the history is a bit different in different parts of the world, but in a sense, there was less meat available. And so spam sort of comes into this void, as it were, and sort of offers meat that's there that maybe you couldn't get fresh meat, but you could get this canned meat. But spam also has the advantage that it is shelf stable, it's long lasting. I mean, people vary on opinions about how long spam will actually last. I've heard opinions that it'll last maybe 3 years from when you buy it to the Best Buy. There's a sort of on the bottom of the can, you can see a kind
Oh,
of it tells what's the Best Buy date. Somebody else told me that it was like up to 5 years after the Best Buy date that it would exist, that it would still be good. And I've read others places that it would last forever until you open it, uncork it, as it were.
wow.
And so that's very useful. If you don't want to, there's the spread of disease and you don't want to have overexposure, by having cans of spam in your pantry, you don't have to go out grocery shopping all the time. And so you can limit your exposure to the disease. And so that also made it very valuable in pandemic times.
Mhm.
And then, that gets to the heart of, I think, spam's value, particularly in wartime, when, you have you have rationing, or you have sort of very devastated um, places from war, and then, people are being occupied and they're not getting food. And so spam becomes a very valuable food because it can be transported easily. And it doesn't need to be cooked. It's already actually cooked in the can. So if you don't have any kind of source of fuel, you're in a war zone, it's very useful. And so this sort of recycles Spam's importance in the pandemic. And that's why it kind of expanded again. It was really interesting, this connection between rationing, wartime, and pandemic. And I think that also struck me as like, ooh, this is interesting. What can we do with this?
Okay. Before I ask the next question, I just want to remind everyone we're sharing our spam memories in the chat. Please do that as we are chatting about the history of spam. So the first time around, you during wartime in Britain, you talked about how initially there was feelings of associated with spam of glamour. You think of the
Yeah.
America, Hollywood, there's the
Yeah.
association made with the United States and the wealth that might have been over there, the image that the U.S. was projecting
Yeah.
around the world. And did you notice? I know this is not in your book, I don't think, but did you notice a different change in feeling during the pandemic? This time around, people are turning to spam again. There's disease in some of the meat processing plants, but spam is there, to fill in the gap. What was the
Mm.
feeling this time around? And I know this is probably totally subjective, but
No, that's right. That's an interesting question. Do you mean in the
yeah,
in Britain? You're asking
yeah,
me instead in Britain. That's a good question. And we love to hear from the audience. We get to question
yeah.
answer about their feeling because I was not in Britain during the war. During I wasn't there in the war either, but during the pandemic,
You
um,
weren't
I wasn't either time, unfortunately. So.
right.
Um,
We might have want that. Yeah,
Yes, I would think because spam was during wartime, because spam was new during World War II to Britain essentially, and because Britain was on rationing and there was meat rationing, so it became a kind of at first it became a kind of relief to housewives who needed protein to feed their families, and so that it also has this glamour of American lifestyle as you mentioned, um,
yeah.
but but now spam it didn't have that same resonance in the pandemic, I think, because
Okay.
it isn't like Britain's on rationing anymore. It's there on the shelf, and so it becomes something very useful again, but not glamorous by any means. I don't think the sort of um, the British opinion about spam would have changed so dramatically from what it had been. Sort of post-war, we get sort of much lower idea about spam and lower status, and I doubt that it rose up to the idea of American glamour again. And indeed, it didn't rise up to American glamour here. So I doubt it, but I'd love to hear people's opinion about that later. Yeah.
And that also made me curious. Well, let me go on to the gender dimensions. You discussed
Yeah.
the gender dimensions of spam and this. It evokes this thinking about the angel in the home that came out of the Victorian period, and
Yeah.
you mentioned it becoming a little frayed and tattered. But Hormel capitalized on this role. Can you talk a little bit more about that and then how that turned out, how that developed?
So before, like in sort of when spam was first made in 1937 and the Great Depression, it was very much marketed to housewives to sort of feed their families in American sense. And so it was supposed to feed sort of for a family of four, very inexpensively and very reasonably and very easily. For housewives who were dealing with these sort of financial constraints. And so there's that aspect to it. And when you look at the advertising during this period, it's very much about how can spam help the housewife, right? So it's geared towards them. And indeed, women were doing the primary sort of cooking at this time. In Britain, when we look in World War II, again, it's sort of geared to the housewife. Again, they would have been doing the bulk of the cooking. But there's also, I found some interesting disconnect in that men still were prioritized in terms of getting the meat that was rationed, whereas women were sort of supposed to sort of subsist. I don't know if that's the word I want, sort of be okay with having more of the spam. And so this idea of men getting the priority comes out in some of the sort of newspapers that I found. And that goes back to sort of Victorian ideas about men are out working and they should get the sort of bulk of the protein and women and children have less. And so there's a sort of longer tradition more than wartime in terms of that, particularly when we think about working class households and doing heavy industry and that kind of thing. So men should get the meat and women and children the spam. So that's an interesting sort of thing that's going on. And we don't see that so much now. It's more like if you like spam or not, but I haven't seen that sort of gender dimension in the post-war aspect.
Okay, thank you for that. Because my next question was gonna be, do you still see that gender dimension now? And
Yeah.
just generally, um, have you, when you were living, how long were you in England for?
I was there for 7 years.
And then you said you lived in Korea as well.
Yeah, I lived there for 3 years. That was before I lived in the UK. So that was a couple of years before the UK.
Were there any gender dimensions to spam consumption in Korea?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Um, I was just thinking, yes, you don't see it in the book. I couldn't show the advertisement, but one of the first advertisements for spam in Korea. So Korea, I should say, Korea gets introduced to spam in the Korean War, but that's as a result of the difficulties that are going on there. So Korean people are starving. There's no real rationing. There's no real organized government, and so the Americans come over and they introduce spam to Korea. And then when the war is over, Koreans can't buy spam because it's only available to the Americans. It's not shipped over. It's not produced. But spam becomes available to Koreans again in 1986. So the Korean company CJ Cheiljedong, which is a Korean-based company, creates a kind of contract with the Hormel Corporation to make spam locally in Korea and make it available for the first time. It's sort of like I think it's 34-year gap when again spam becomes available to Koreans. And that's really interesting because it's hugely popular from the beginning. And it's slightly different recipe than you get in the United States. It has a little less salt, little less fat, to sort of geared towards Korean taste. But at that moment, so in 1986, one of the first advertisements that I found was an image of a young Korean woman wearing a kind of cowgirl outfit and sort of extolling the virtues of this American influenced food. And so, it suggests that if you want to be young and vital and hip and sort of in the American lifestyle, you should eat this spam. And this is the image and the ideas that are being projected to Koreans. And then because there's this young cowgirl woman, sort of suggesting that it is sort of geared a bit towards women,
Oh,
which is interesting. And then I should say also, um, often at that point, and often still in Korea, might have changed a little, but it's often women doing the bulk of the cooking. And so
okay,
again, they would want to advertise and gear this food towards Korean women to get them to take it up and feed their families. Um,
okay.
so there's that dimension. But in Korea, because it's so popular, everybody eats it. It's so common. It's not like it's only for women and men eat the meat. No, really popular.
Tremendously popular. Okay, so then that for me begs the question. It's okay. My perception. Forgive me, and we'll talk about this later in the chat. But my experience with spam in the United States is more of a poverty thing. Uh,
Mm,
we were having hard times. We had the fried eggs and fried spam for breakfast or dinner or lunch. So for me, it doesn't, the association with it is it's something you eat when you have to. My mother enjoyed it in sandwiches, but we us kids were like, yeah, no, we're good.
yeah.
No spam for us. And then also in your book, you're talking about how in the UK, as the Second World War wore on,
Yeah.
people they got really tired of it. But in Korea, it became popular, and then you said it's kind of like reissued in 1986 after
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
war,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it enjoys popularity now, no matter who is enjoying it. What other places? How do you connect that? What other places is it popular in and unpopular, and how might that be related to U.S. foreign aid and military intervention?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think that spam sort of is the trail that the American soldiers left as they went around all these different places. So very often you find spam in these different places because some aspect of either the World War II or Korean War or something, American soldiers connected to that in that way. And one example, which we haven't talked yet, is about Japan. And so
Mm.
of course, Americans were there, but it's particularly popular in Okinawa. And of course, that's because of the war. The Americans took Okinawa on the way to sort of getting towards the Japanese home islands. They're sort of planning it, as it were. It's not what happened. And so today, Okinawa, they're huge consumption. I mean, I think it's 90% of the Spam eaten in Japan is eaten in Okinawa. That has to do with the war, but also there's a huge American military base in Okinawa. And for a long time, essentially, the island was dominated by the Americans. I think it was the 1970s or 1980s, they gave it back to Japan. But until that point, the Americans essentially colonized the island. And so that sort of legacy lives on with the Americans being there and the Japanese. So you see it then go into traditional Japanese dishes in Okinawa. Um, yeah, so that's really interesting. So the military has a really crucial role to play in this, and war does. So I always think of Spam as a war food and a military food, and then it sort of transcends into people's lives. I mean, one other place that's really popular is the Philippines. And so it's really important for Philippines today. It serves as a comfort food. It's sort of handed down generationally. So I know, Brandy, you said there's a disconnect between what your mom would eat and what you're like forced to eat. But in the Philippines, like they enjoy it with grandparents and grandchildren, and they keep it in their pantry. The Philippines has a contract with Hormel to make it there, make Spam there as well, and so it shows you how popular it is there. And so I think it's really fascinating, and that's why I really focus on that in the book, because
Yeah.
that's so crucial to the story. Um,
Are there places that are not the U.S. or the U.K. where it's more regarded as not ubiquitously popular, but more as a hardship food that you came across in your research? Were there
mm.
places that were kind of like, I can take it or leave it. I'll eat it if I have to, type of a thing?
Not so much. I mean, it's kind of like that feeling I would suggest in the UK, this sort of feeling that we have, that you have. It's the
Yeah.
feeling now in the United States when it wasn't originally in the United States, but it became that, I would say, in the post-war period. I think often the American soldiers are coming back and they're sick of it because they've had to eat it all wartime and they don't want to eat it anymore. And so the feeling changes. I haven't come across that aspect about the poverty, but as I said, there are 48 countries, and so it may be like that. But I think there's also the strong influence of American policy, American military, American lifestyle, and by people buying it and eating it, they're kind of buying into that idea. And so I think that also helps propel Spam, whether or not people actually think it's tasty. There's that sort of cultural American influence going on. So, for example, it's eaten in South America. And so, I'm not certain if there's a wartime element to it, but indeed, American influence, to South America has been longstanding. And so I think that might be part of that as well. Um, yeah, so it varies by location and it varies by people's historical interaction with Spam, whether it was in wartime or not, depending on how they value it, really, which also fascinates me. Mm.
Endlessly fascinating. So then that brings me to my next question. You spent some time in your book talking about its carryover, this popularity carrying over to pop culture in different countries. On page,
Yeah.
I think it was 94, you talked about haikus made,
Yes,
spam haikus. And
yes, indeed.
yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about its presence in pop culture in places inside and outside of the
Yeah,
U.S.?
and I can share some haikus with you. Let me sort of
Yeah.
pull them up for you.
Mhm.
Um, so the haikus that Brandy is talking about is I think someone at MIT. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to scroll through and find them for you. Here they are. Um, Someone at MIT sort of compiled this list of haikus. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So they compiled this list of haikus, or people could write in, and it's an archive now that it doesn't take haikus anymore, but there's like over 19,000 haikus only devoted to Spam. And so you can see a range of them here, which suggests the range of opinions about Spam. So some are very positive, like the first one, Hormel Perfection, open a Spam can now, yum, ultimate in taste. So very positive. And the one all the way over and down is highly unnatural. The tortured shape of this food is a small pink coffin. So so even like this is an American-based archive. So even in the United States, there's quite a range, and I think this reflects sort of world range. So yes, there's the spam haiku, and I invite you to sort of Google spam haiku archive, and you will find it. Um,
Unbelievable.
there's also, and the people in the UK will be familiar with this, is the Monty Python's Flying Circus skit in, I think it's 1971, and I can show you an image. So. If anybody is unfamiliar with this, so this is the menu. So essentially, it's a couple, a man and a woman. Although the woman is a man in drag. They go into a West Bromley sort of greasy spoon uh, diner, and they are a cafe, and they have confronted with this menu full of spam. And so the man loves spam, and he wants extra helpings of spam, as it were. And the woman sort of hates it, and she kind of goes on, "Can I have something about spam, something without spam?" And of course, there's nothing without spam. I think maybe the lobster thermidor is the only thing, which is quite unusual at a sort of greasy spoon cafe. And meanwhile, on the other side of the room in the cafe, you've got a group of Vikings, and occasionally they will break out in song, which will say spam, spam, lovely spam, wonderful spam. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you can watch it on YouTube. It's hilarious. And this goes into sort of the pop culture and I guess the mixed impressions of spam in the UK. There's sort of a timeless thing. Interestingly, the men who created this, the Monty Python troupe, they were all born in the wartime, and so they were very familiar with spam, and so they're kind of taking a joke on that. But there's so many interesting pop culture aspects to spam, and that it kind of people love it and hate it, and it's fun and it's entertaining, and it's kind of all these things mixed up, and I think that's part of its sort of charm or enduring legacy, I guess I want to say. Here, I'll stop sharing. But it sort of adds to spam's value, I think. I mean, that was part of the fun. I was entertained most of the time by looking at all these interesting things, you know.
What about in places like Korea? Can we just go back to that because
Yeah.
it's I think you wrote about that as well, a little bit about how it's popular there. Do you have any images from?
I do not on
Okay.
hand.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have that slideshow. But if you Google like
Yeah.
Korea spam gift sets, you can see like pictures of grocery stores where they'll have like, maybe a couple cans of spam, and then they'll have fancy oil, and these gift sets can run up to like $100. And people give these to like friends and family and coworkers, and it's kind of expected. So it was kind of starting when I was there. I was there, what were the years? It was something like I was there 2003 to 2005. I think it was a long time ago. And so that was just when that kind of tradition was starting. So spam was already popular, but this sort of tradition of gift giving was starting, and then it's really taken off now. So I think there's some statistic like the company makes, I think 60% of its profits just from those two holidays in the year. So the fall holiday and the New Year. So you can see how popular. So you can Google it. I'm sorry, I don't have an image for you this afternoon. But
Okay, that's
but
okay.
but yeah.
Okay, so we are down really to our last minute before we start opening it up and we start looking at people's favorite spam memories and
That's,
taking questions.
looking forward to that.
And there's a lot. There's a lot. Um, well, I've got a couple, so you can pick which one. My first question is there any end in sight to spam's popularity? Like what factors could, mitigate that? And then my other one is what's your favorite spam recipe? So,
Oh gosh. Okay. Wow. Okay. The first one's easier to answer than the second,
okay,
I think.
do that.
Um, I don't think so, because spam has this enduring legacy. So, although it has different values in different parts of the world, like Asia, certainly not, it keeps getting more and more popular. I mean, even now, I brought you can buy sort of vegetarian version. Everybody can see that. And I think they started making that in Hong Kong, but you can buy it now. So, showing the legacy of like spam's influence. So in Asia, definitely not. I think, anywhere, because during the pandemic it had that important value. It still has important value. Brandy, as you mentioned, it's valuable for low-income families that need a good source of protein that they can turn to very easily. And so that's useful all over the world, in the United States and elsewhere. And I just think because it's so quirky and interesting and culturally viable, I guess I could say, that I don't think it's going anywhere. They're continually making new flavors. I mean, I think we're up to 13 flavors. I mean, one of the most recent ones is Korean barbecue spam. You can't buy this everywhere. I don't know if you can buy it in the UK, but in the United States you can buy it. There's another flavor is gochujang, which is Korean spicy. And so, people expect they're going to come out with new flavors and they just keep building. So I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Um,
Oh.
and
Well,
you want to my recipe, right? You want to know what? Okay.
yeah, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite? You
There's
tell the
so
truth.
many recipes. I mean, the book is full of recipes from all over the world about spam. I mean, I'm always partial to Korean food. And so because spam is so integral to Korean food, one of the things I like is kimbap, which is essentially you have a little bit of spam, you have rice, and you have seaweed and vegetables rolled up. It's like a bit like sushi and cut up, and you have sort of medallions of that sort of rolled up together. So that's kimbap. There's also budae-jjigae, which is a Korean army stew. And I know that somebody mentioned it in the chat, that it's a combination of all different American things that the Koreans could get in wartime. So like adding it all together. So spam, and it might have American beans, and it might have American cheese, and it might have kimchi, and sort of a combination of things. So that's really tasty. You kind of share that. It's a big pot. It's like a hot pot.
Wow.
And I mean, I could say that the weirdest, unusual spam dish that I've ever seen a recipe for was butterscotch spam cookies.
Mm.
I have not eaten it, but when I visited Austin, Minnesota, where spam is made, and there's a spam museum, which if you're ever in Austin, Minnesota, highly recommend it. It's fascinating, interesting, entertaining. One of the recipes you could get from their system was this butterscotch spam recipe, which I sent to
Wow.
myself, but I didn't have the courage to make it, I'm afraid.
Well,
Um,
as a Minnesotan, I am a little secretly horrified by that last one, but that's
really?
okay. They're kind of quirky up there. All right, so as you're thinking of your questions, I'm gonna just try to read a few of these. We got the battered for school dinners. Let me see.
Oh, there are a
Roast,
lot of good memories in here. Wow, fabulous.
yeah, roast pan with brown sugar and cloves. That sounds really good.
That's a sort of traditional, yeah, that was very common.
Yeah, spam musubi.
Musubi. Oh, that's in Hawaii. That's a bit like the kimbap that I mentioned. Very tasty.
Yep. Someone else mentioned, yep, you're right, the army stew. Lots of different ways. No spam in France.
Yeah, I don't think it's on continental Europe. They didn't want it. I think
Yeah,
they
and
weren't having it.